In the middle of America's heartland, among the rolling fields of northwest Iowa, a remarkable story has taken shape. A story 100 years in the making. A story built on faith, craftsmanship, hard work, relationships, and service. It begins with Andrew Vogel, known as Pop, who immigrated as a teenager from the Netherlands in 1913, dreaming of a life as a farmer.
They landed in Michigan for a while, and he found himself working in a furniture factory in Grand Rapids. And he was assigned to sanding.
Back when they were in Holland, that his dad was known for carriage refinishing. So the farmers would bring in the carriage and they would refinish it. And one of the things at that time was to to get the really bright high gloss finish, you had to sand it, and you didn't have sandpaper then. You had pumice stone or pumice, and you would just rub that. And so he, of course, being the younger kid, that was his job.
And he said, I came to America and I'm now in Michigan, and what am I doing? I'm sanding. I don't think so. Ultimately, connected with a distant relative that was farming south of Orange City, and thought he'd get out here and work, earn some money, and then see what the rest of his life would be.
He worked on farms for a couple of years, but soon found that life as a farmer wasn't where he was meant to be. With a growing family to support, Andrew returned to what he knew best.
They looked to see what they could do, and I think, he talks about, as they painted some of these creameries and did some of these projects around town, he's like, well, I can make a paint as good as that.
In 1926, he purchased 2 paint mills from Chicago and began making paint, just as his father and grandfather had done before him. We're fortunate to still have a pole from the old shop in the Netherlands, covered in colorful samples of the paints his family created.
I wanted Jean to see the old country, and I wanted her to see Berlicum. And so we rented a car and we drove north, found Berlicum, and then found the house and shed. But we were told that it was bought by a father and son that ran a little food shop around the corner. They said, yeah, we bought this thinking that eventually we will tear this down and we want to build a proper storage building. So before we left, I asked the son, I said, if you tear this down, could we buy the pole from you? Because obviously it had a lot of sentimental value, and he understood that. He saw with us coats of paint, and he looked at me and he said, Papa says, to us it's just a piece of wood, but to you it has great meaning. We'll do it.
Even during the Great Depression, the young company grew, creating coatings for local creameries, grain elevators, and bridges throughout the countryside.
They asked me to paint the creamery. They're all steam or so. And then I was thinking, if I ever make paint, if a fellow had something that would work in the creamery. And I got and then I got paint made. I still cannot imagine how I could make an enamel good enough to fool anybody, Creamolite and Dialite.
Creamolite.
And that worked, And the Kennedy Department, cream suppliers, they came and they could sell that. And and really, those days there was the creameries yet. And really, I think I went over just about 100%. And I didn't have no trouble because they got trouble with every paint, and I think I was done better, see.
After World War II, farm equipment manufacturing boomed. Andrew's sons returned from service and joined the business, helping expand it into 5 states. In 1958, Frank Vogel became president and continued that growth, both organically and through acquisition. Then came one of the biggest tests. In 1964, the company's only factory was destroyed by fire.
When the fire whistle went off, I remember everybody in the family looking toward the factory. But I remember seeing smoke coming out of the window of the plant on the second floor and thinking, oh, this is real. The factory ultimately completely burned down. The new addition that had been built, not that many years before, a modern cement block building, totally engulfed. And I also remember people from the community churning out and saying, what can we do? And there was just a brigade passing, for the most part, 5-gallon pails. Dad got the call. He was, I think, in southeast Iowa, and he drove home. And there's a picture of him holding the phone, looking out, and on the phone with. And I recall more that we got calls from competitors that heard about the fire, offering if they could help, they would make paint for us, put our label on it, and get us through if we wanted them to.
Thanks to that support, Vogel Paint was running again with a new plant opening in 1965. The company's biggest acquisition to that point came in 1967 with the purchase of Diamond Products in Marshalltown. Soon after, the name Diamond Vogel Paint was introduced, the iconic brand that remains today. Through the 1970s and 80s, the store network kept growing as more companies joined the family.
We focused in on what we could do with liquids during that period and had a lot of growth, not only with technology, entering into two-component liquid paints and materials, but also baking products, and also water-based was an ongoing or upcoming technology, primarily because of some environmental desires to be lower impact. And how to do that? Could you do it less solvent, or is there a water possibility as a carrier for a coating? So it was a great area in time span of a lot of change, but very positive for the company.
In 1987, Drew Vogel became president of Diamond Vogel, marking a new era of leadership.
We had a meeting, and we didn't really have formal board meetings back in those days, but we tried to get it together around the table and just kind of talk about the company. We had met for about a day and a half, and when the meeting concluded, Dad said, well, I just wanted to tell you, in 2 years I want to start working part-time. And Drew, I think you ought to move to Orange City in 2 years. And it's kind of a shock to me because he hadn't talked about it. And it just felt like things were starting to knit, and I had no desire, no dream of interrupting that for a while. It was just, we were just having a good time. So it was a little bit of a surprise.
The late 1990s brought significant expansion to the Orange City campus, including a new corporate support center and larger technical and warehouse facilities. Meanwhile, innovation was taking hold. Well, as early as the 70s, Drew had been asked to explore promising new technology for coatings, powder coatings.
The process for the company was we didn't really find a way to acquire technology, so we decided that we're going to have to design our own formulary and that technology. So the first course of action was to set up a small laboratory, and that was in the mid-1990s. Hired a chemist with a little bit of experience, but more from the raw material, not from the actual industry. It was an exciting day when we actually went from start to finish and made a powder coating at about a 1 pound quantity, but sprayed it out, cured it. It's like, wow, this actually does work.
By 1999, Diamond Vogel launched production of Peridium powder coatings, followed by a major powder facility expansion in 2002, and then again in 2016. In 2017, Jeff Powell became president, the first leader from outside the Vogel family.
I remember getting together with Doug and Mark, and together asking the question of ourselves, how do we want to do this in the future? We loved being invested in the business, but for the first time recognizing that owning a business, stewarding a business through ownership, and managing and leading a business on a day-to-day basis were not necessarily the same thing. It was a departure. We wondered what the previous two generations might be thinking, by doing that. But we became convicted that for the sake of the company and all the potential that was there, it was what we had to open ourselves up to.
In recent years, the company has continued investing in growth in the future, including a new aerosol facility in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, the completion of the Innovation Center, and multiple expansions to powder coating operations. From humble beginnings to a trusted coatings leader serving customers across the nation, this is more than a business story. It is an enduring American success story. A story of people. A story of service. A story of a legacy that inspires our future.